The silence of the night has always been the loudest time of day for me. It was at night that I heard them, the voices of the past that I tried to forget. They whispered to me from mirrors, from shadows, from the rustling of curtains when the house fell asleep. Every sound was a reminder of what I had locked deep within my soul. I am 30 years old. I have a successful career as a psychologist, a loving family, and two wonderful children. But sometimes, looking into the eyes of my eldest daughter, I see a reflection of my past. It's a gaze full of questions she hasn't yet dared to ask, and I fear the day she will. That night we were sitting in the living room. Laura, 16, bright and sincere, leaned towards me trustingly, as she used to do when she was little. "Mom," her voice was soft but trembling with tension. "Have you ever loved someone so much that it felt wrong?" This question caught me off guard. It felt like it sucked all the air out of my lungs, leaving only a dull ache. Why did she ask? What does she know? Or is it just innocent curiosity? "Why do you ask?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice came out too tense. "Just thinking," Laura shrugged, looking down. "They say at school that love has no rules, and I don't know what to think about it." My mind raced. Love has no rules. This phrase hit me harder than I expected. For so many years I had tried to understand it, justify it, forgive. "Laura," I began cautiously, "love is a complicated thing. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not, and it can hurt the most." I didn't realize my hands were clenched into fists until Laura touched my palm. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice sounded concerned. "Yes, dear," I quickly replied. "Everything is fine." But chaos erupted in my head. Memories buried under layers of time burst out like water from a cracked dam. Jason, summer heat, the chirping of crickets, his voice so confident and close. And that evening, when it all began, I abruptly stood up to hide from her piercing gaze. "It's late, Laura. You should go to bed." She nodded and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked into the mirror above the fireplace, and in its depths, I thought I saw him, the one I was supposed to forget. "You could never escape me," the reflection seemed to whisper. Summer was our time. The hot air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and lemonade, and the long days blended into even longer nights, filled with the whispering of cicadas. I was 17 then, and I felt the world acutely, as if it were sharpened to my emotions. Everything was either blindingly beautiful or frighteningly wrong. He came into our lives unexpectedly. Jason was 5 years older than me, the son of my mom's younger sister. His parents had just divorced, and his aunt apparently thought that our quiet town could ease her son's pain. On the first evening he entered our house, I felt something strange. His confident smile seemed out of place against the weariness in his eyes. He looked like he was searching for something he couldn't express in words. "Hi, Mary," he said, dropping his travel bag by the door. "Long time no see." In reality, we hadn't seen each other in 5 years. He had grown taller. His features had gained a sharpness that wasn't there in my memories of him as a boy. His confidence was unsettling, but at the same time, there was something soothing about him. "Hi," I replied, feeling a strange warmth spreading inside me. "Welcome back." Mom told me to show him his room. As he walked behind me up the stairs, I felt his presence like his breath was burning my back. I didn't know why my heart was pounding so hard. "He's just my cousin," I reminded myself. Nothing unusual. That evening, I found him in the living room. He was sitting in a chair, elbows on his knees, thoughtfully watching a football game on TV. I didn't like football, but for some reason I wanted to stay close to him. "Do you root for any team?" I asked, sitting on the couch across from him. "Not really, just watching to not think," he replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Not think about what?" I smiled, trying to be casual. Jason looked up, and his gaze was so deep and probing that I felt like he could see right through me. "About a lot of things," he answered after a pause. We fell silent. The TV continued to murmur, but neither he nor I were watching the screen. I suddenly realized I was watching how the lamplight touched his profile. Soft shadows played on his face, highlighting his cheekbones. It was beautiful. Wrong, but beautiful. "Boring here, huh?" I finally asked. "No," he replied. It's peaceful here. His words sounded like they had a hidden meaning. Peace. I didn't feel it. In his presence, my heart was beating wildly, and I couldn't understand why. From that evening, we started spending more time together. I pretended it was by chance, but it wasn't. I deliberately went to the kitchen when he was drinking coffee. I sat on the couch as soon as he turned on the TV. It was all under the pretext of getting closer, but I knew what I was doing, and he knew. Sometimes our hands accidentally touched. Sometimes our gazes met for too long. They were all little things, but each one made me hold my breath. One evening, I settled on the couch, and he sat next to me. We were watching some movie, but neither of us was following the plot. My head involuntarily leaned against his shoulder. He tensed but didn't move away. The warmth of his body passed through the fabric of my t-shirt, like a fire burning through barriers. "Do you often do this?" he asked softly, not looking at me. "What exactly?" I pretended to be innocent. "Lean on people." I laughed to hide my embarrassment. "Only with those I feel comfortable with," I replied. He didn't answer, but I noticed how his lips barely twitched, as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. That night was especially hot. I couldn't sleep and quietly went down to the living room. Jason was sitting in the kitchen drinking water, the moonlight falling on his face. He looked at me, and there was nothing familiar in his gaze. At that moment, something between us changed. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, putting the glass on the table. "Yes." I barely exhaled. We stood in silence until the tension, inexplicable but palpable, became unbearable. I don't remember who took the first step, but suddenly I was next to him. My hand accidentally touched his. The warmth from his skin spread through me, and I couldn't move. "This is wrong," he said, barely audible. But he didn't step back. I couldn't answer. My mind screamed that he was right, but my body moved forward. His breathing became heavier. My hand involuntarily touched his wrist, and this innocent gesture seemed like a huge crime. That's when I felt the first spark, the one that ignited a fire that was supposed to destroy us both. A few days passed since that night conversation in the kitchen, but his gaze, his words, "This is wrong," still echoed in my head. I caught myself thinking about Jason more and more, and each thought brought a storm of contradictions. A mix of guilt, embarrassment, and something sweet and unexplored. We tried to avoid each other, or rather, I tried. But every time our paths crossed, the tension between us became almost tangible. It seemed like the whole house was charged with electricity that we were afraid to discharge. One evening, when our parents went to visit friends, I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Jason came out of the house holding a bottle of soda. He stopped at the door, as if unsure whether to join us. But I just looked at him and nodded to the empty spot next to me. "How long are we going to pretend nothing happened?" he asked, sitting down. I felt my whole body tense. This conversation was inevitable, but I feared it the most. "I don't know what you're talking about," I tried to lie, but my voice betrayed me with a tremble. He laughed, but there was no joy in that laughter. "You know. We both know." I fell silent. Chaos erupted inside me. It was as if all those feelings I had tried to hide were now bursting out. "Jason," I began but couldn't finish. "Mary," he turned to me, his gaze unwavering. "This is crazy. I know. But every time I look at you—" His words trailed off, but I already knew what he wanted to say, what I was afraid to admit even to myself. "This is wrong," I whispered. "Then why does it feel so right?" he replied. Those words hung in the air between us. I wanted to answer, but instead my gaze fell on his lips again. It was a moment that lasted an eternity. We both knew this was the moment to step back, but neither of us did. When our lips met, everything around us disappeared. There was only him, his warmth, his scent, his touch. My thoughts clouded, as if the whole world had shrunk to this one moment. But as soon as it happened, reality hit us both like cold water. I stepped back, feeling my face burn. Jason looked at me as if he couldn't believe it had happened. "I'm sorry," he muttered, standing up. I shouldn't have." He turned and left, leaving me on the porch trying to sort out my feelings. His words, his justifications echoed in my head, but my heart whispered something entirely different. Since then, our meetings became even more tense. I tried to stay away from him, but it was impossible. Every time I entered a room and saw him, something inside me tightened. His gaze, just as cautious and probing as before, haunted me even when I closed my eyes. But the heaviest night was still ahead. It happened 2 weeks later. Our parents left for the whole day, leaving us alone. I tried to find something to do, studying, cleaning, anything to keep from thinking about being alone with Jason. That day, I looked into his room for the first time. The door was ajar, and I saw him sitting at his desk, writing something, completely focused. But it seemed like he also felt my presence. "Do you need something?" he asked without looking up. "No." I hesitated, feeling panic rise. "I just wanted to ask how you—" I didn't finish the sentence. Jason's gaze met mine, and I realized that all words were meaningless. He stood up, came to me, and I suddenly realized I couldn't move. "You always look like that," he said softly. "Like what?" I whispered, feeling my heart pounding wildly. "Like you're waiting for me to make a move." And he did. His hands cupped my face, and at that moment I could no longer fight myself. What happened next was neither right nor wrong. It was inevitable. But with it came the dark realization. We had crossed a line beyond which there was no return. After that night, everything changed. Even the air in the house felt heavy and thick, as if it knew our secret and judged us for it. We avoided looking each other in the eye, and when we accidentally met, we tried to speak quickly and formally, like strangers. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, that it could all be forgotten. But every time I saw Jason, something inside me whispered, "It's not that simple." A week passed, then another. Our parents didn't notice anything, or maybe they just didn't want to. I spent more time with my textbooks, hiding behind the pages like a shield. Jason also withdrew into himself. His usual lightness gave way to a heavy silence. Every time he passed me, I caught his gaze, full of guilt and something else, something I was afraid to admit. One evening, Mom called me to the kitchen. She was cooking dinner and looked especially lively. "Mary," she began, choosing her words carefully, "we need to talk." "Did something happen?" I asked, feeling a wave of anxiety. "No, nothing bad," she smiled, but her gaze was tense. "It's just, Jason is leaving soon." Those words hit me like a thunderclap. Leaving? Where? Why? I tried to hide the panic that gripped me, but Mom noticed my expression. "He found a job in another city," she continued. "He needs to move on, start a new life. And, I think it's for the best." For the best. Those words stuck in my head like a thorn. For whom is it best? For him? For us? I couldn't ask any of the questions swirling in my mind. Instead, I nodded, trying to seem indifferent. "When is he leaving?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "In a week, 7 days. That's all that was left." I avoided Jason all the next day. I couldn't look at him, couldn't talk to him. But that evening I heard him knock softly on my door. His knock was cautious, almost inaudible, but it made my heart skip a beat. "Can I come in?" he asked. I silently nodded. He came in and closed the door behind him, leaning against it as if afraid his strength would fail him. "You know I'm leaving," he said, his voice filled with pain. "Yes," I replied, looking away. "I have to do this, Mary. We both know why." I knew, but that didn't make it any easier. "It's too hard," he continued, his voice trembling. "We made a mistake, a big one, and now we need to leave it all behind." I wanted to scream that it wasn't a mistake, that I didn't regret it, but instead I just nodded, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "It will be better for both of us," he said, taking a step towards me. I don't want you to suffer because of me." "I'm already suffering," I whispered, unable to hold back anymore. He looked at me, his gaze filled with guilt and despair, but he said nothing. He just gently hugged me, as if afraid any movement would shatter us both. "I will always remember," he said softly, and then let me go and left. His departure was quick and quiet. He hugged everyone, including me, but it was an ordinary hug, one that no one could suspect. When he got into the car and drove away, I stood on the porch, feeling my heart tear apart. Jason left, and with him, a part of me went away. I tried to move on to return to normal life. But in the house where he had lived, everything reminded me of him. His laughter, his scent, even the sound of his footsteps. I couldn't erase him from my life, no matter how hard I tried. In the following months, I immersed myself in my studies, desperately trying to fill the void. But at night, when everything around me fell silent, I heard the whisper of the past. I saw his face, felt the warmth of his touch, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw his gaze from that last night. I knew I had to let go, but how can you let go of something that has become a part of you? 2 years had passed since Jason left our home. Life went on, but its flow seemed frozen, stuck somewhere between the present and memories. I enrolled in university, moved to another city, and tried to start fresh. All that year, I filled my days with studies, work, and new acquaintances, but every evening ended the same way, with memories of him. Sometimes I wondered if he felt the same way. Did he pick up the phone to send me a message and then put it away like I did? Or had he truly let us go? These questions haunted me, but I tried to suppress them. I had to move on. Everything changed on the day I heard a knock at the door of my apartment. It was an ordinary evening, textbooks, a cup of coffee, and the noise of neighbors behind the wall. But when I opened the door, the world seemed to turn upside down. Standing on the threshold was Jason. I froze as if my mind refused to accept reality. His face was the same as I remembered, but there was something new in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. "Hi, Mary," he said, his voice sounding both familiar and strange. "Jason," was all I could exhale. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His presence filled the room, as if in those 2 years, nothing had changed. "I couldn't take it anymore," he said. "I tried to forget, tried to start a new life. But every day, every night, I thought only of you." His words hit me like an electric shock. I felt two voices battling inside me, one telling me I should stop him, the other saying I couldn't hold back anymore. "You can't just come here and say that," I finally managed to say. "You know this will ruin everything." "Ruin what?" he asked, moving closer. "Mary, my life is already ruined. I lost everything trying to pretend I could live without you." I stepped back, feeling the walls of the room closing in around us. His words were like a knife, opening old wounds that I had tried so hard to heal. "Jason, we can't," I began, but he interrupted me. "We can, and I won't let you say it's wrong anymore." He moved closer, and I felt his warmth, his scent, which I had tried so hard to forget. My mind told me I should stop him, but my heart and body had already made their decision. That night, everything we had been holding back burst out. Words no longer mattered, only touches. Every movement was filled with the passion and pain that had accumulated over 2 years of separation. It wasn't just a physical act, it was a liberation, a merging of two souls that had been torn apart for too long. When it was all over, we lay side by side, listening to the silence of the night. I looked at him, saw his face in the dim light, and inside me conflicting feelings battled, joy and fear, peace and chaos. "What now?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Jason turned to me, his eyes serious but calm. "Now I won't leave anymore," he replied. "I lost you once, and that was my biggest mistake. I won't make it again." I knew this decision would change everything. It would put us against the world, but at that moment, it no longer mattered. All I felt was his hand in mine, his presence beside me, and perhaps for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The morning after that night was both quiet and filled with hidden energy. Sunlight flooded the room, touching Jason's face as he slept beside me. I watched him for a long time, observing his steady breathing. He was so calm, so sure of his decision. I, on the other hand, felt like a ship thrown onto the shore after a long storm. The world outside the window lived its ordinary life. People hurried to work, buses honked, children laughed. But inside this small apartment, reality was different. We could no longer pretend to be part of this world. Our choice had been made, and its consequences now hung over us like a storm cloud. Throughout the day, Jason gave me no time for doubts. He was more determined than ever that he wanted to be with me. His resolve gave me strength. I knew he was ready to fight for us, and that gave me courage. "We need to talk to our parents," he said that evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Do you think they'll understand? I asked, not hiding my anxiety. No, he honestly replied, but we have to try. We have to be honest with them and with ourselves. I nodded, feeling fear spread through my body. But I knew he was right. We could no longer live in the shadows. If we wanted to be together, we had to accept everything that came with it. The next week we went to see my parents. The drive seemed endless, and the whole time I mentally prepared for the worst. When we arrived, Mom greeted us with her usual warmth, but her smile faded as soon as she saw Jason holding my hand. What's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. We sat in the living room and Jason took the lead. He told them everything, about our feelings, how we tried to fight them, and how we couldn't do it anymore. His voice was firm, but there was pain in it. Mom listened in silence, and at some point, Dad got up and left the room. His steps were heavy like hammer blows. When Jason finished, a heavy silence hung in the room. Mom held her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I felt like the world around us was about to collapse. Do you understand that this will ruin everything? She finally said. Do you understand what people will say? How this will affect our family? We understand, I replied, trying to keep my voice from trembling. But this is our life, Mom. This is our choice. Mom looked at me for a long time, as if trying to see the girl I used to be. But that girl was no more. I don't know how I can live with this, she said at last, her voice filled with bitterness. But you've already decided everything. The conversation with my parents was just the beginning. We faced a wave of judgment from family, friends, and society. But through it all, we held each other's hands. Every whisper behind our backs, every judgmental smile only strengthened our resolve. We knew our path would not be easy, but we also knew it was worth it. A year after that night, we got married. The wedding was quiet, just for the two of us. We decided we didn't want to show our happiness to those who weren't ready to accept it. This was our day, and on that day we felt the freedom we had been denied for so long. Now we live far from everyone, in a small house on the outskirts of the city, where there are no judgmental gazes and no one knows us. Here we can be ourselves. Every day, every morning, I wake up next to him and understand that I made the right choice. Sometimes the past reminds me of itself, like a soft whisper, like a shadow flickering in the corner. But now I am not afraid of it. I look into Jason's eyes, and in them, I see everything I need. We have freed ourselves from expectations, from fears, from judgments. And in this freedom, I have found what I have been searching for all my life. Love that is worth everything.